Hey there, interwebs. I hope you're doing well. So for today's video, doing a little bit of an impromptu thing. Unfortunately, because I kind of want to talk a little bit about something that's happened in my personal life surrounding a surgery that I was hoping to be getting in the next week or so. That's kind of left me a little bit. I'm gonna be honest, kind of a little bit devastated at the moment, and I'm not feeling too great at the moment about it. And while I do want to share this story, and I'm going to kind of be honest about what's going on with me and why I'm so upset, and for those of you who follow me on other platforms or watching elsewhere, some of the stuff that I've talked about, you may already know what I'm sort of alluding to. But the reason that I'm doing this video is not to just do a kind of woe is me sort of thing. Despite what some people may think, I don't really like doing videos where I'm just talking about sad things. But the reason that I ultimately decided to do this video is because when I kind of shared out what was happening on some of my social medias, I had a few people reach out to me saying that they're dealing with either the same exact thing or dealt with very similar situations because they're trans, or in other sort of areas of healthcare that they dealt with very similar issues. And they shared with me very kind words about how they felt similarly heartbroken over hearing what happened to me, and just sort of thinking about what I'm feeling right now and how I know that it's mirrored by many, specifically trans people when it comes to healthcare, but also many other folks in other areas of healthcare, both in the United States and around the world. I figured that I would just kind of talk about my experience and what I'm feeling right now, because it's honestly kind of hard. And I think talking about it will help me feel better, will help others feel better, and also hopefully impart to a lot of you out there who may not know what many trans people go through in these sort of situations. In many cases, much worse than what I'm personally dealing with. In many ways, I'm kind of lucky in a lot of aspects, though it doesn't particularly feel like it at the moment to me. I figured that this would just be an important video to do, even though I hope this doesn't come across, because it's not intended to, as a sort of woe is Jessie sort of video, but just sort of sharing what I'm feeling in hopes that it will make other people feel seen and also explain the feeling to others. So with that preamble out of the way a little bit, I'll kind of explain a little bit what's going on. So as many of you may know, if you've been following me on my live streams or elsewhere, or my Patreon or Discord and all that stuff, I was planning to get facial feminization surgery this coming week. Actually, like literally in just a week, my facial feminization surgery was scheduled. For those of you who don't know, facial feminization surgery is actually a kind of blanket term for actually a bunch of small surgeries that a surgeon can do for trans women that can sort of take our face and sort of alter it to fall more in line with what we would deem to be more feminine and culturally feminine, what we sort of deem to be sort of a culturally feminine look for a face. Like they can do things like a rhinoplasty to lower the look of someone's nose. They can also take off some of the cheekbones to sort of make it more rounded. Basically, like China's changing a lot of bone structure that can't change with things like hormone replacement therapy for trans women, especially trans women who transitioned after they went through puberty. For many trans women, including myself, facial feminization surgery is actually part of a treatment plan to help deal with gender dysphoria, the distress that some people have at not having their body align with sort of how they view themselves in their gender. For me, as I've said before numerous times, I have had gender dysphoria in my past, and I've had hormone replacement surgeries as well as other gender confirmation surgeries like my vaginoplasty and breast augmentation to help alleviate it, and it has helped wonders for my mental health. It has helped me sort of become much happier and comfortable in my life, and it has completely changed my life overall in terms of making me just being a happier, healthier person in my day-to-day, and I cannot tell you how much all of that transition-related stuff has helped me with that stuff. This isn't to say that all trans people suffer from gender dysphoria. Many don't, but for me particularly, that was just my journey as a trans person towards helping me live a very happy, healthy, productive life like many other trans people go through. And for me, facial feminization surgery was going to be the last surgery that I wanted to get in my transition. It is the last thing that I sort of see in my transition journey that I want to have to sort of help alleviate the last lingering bits of gender dysphoria that I have. As many of you know, I've been open about like being very happy with my transition overall and very happy, but this was just one thing that I still have felt some lingering dysphoria about when I look in the mirror and look at my face. And By the way, I very much appreciate when I've talked about facial feminization surgery. Many of you out there have been so kind and said, Jessie, you look beautiful. You don't need facial feminization surgery. You look wonderful already. And by all means, that means so much to me. I actually really appreciate that, and it is all very kind of you. But just know that, like, for gender dysphoria, it's more for my head and not necessarily even reflective of how I look, as I've talked about in recent like videos on sexiness. I probably looked sexy even before I transitioned, when I was looking more stereotypically masculine. Many people consider me sexy then, as some friends have told me since the fact, but that was not how I saw myself. And while today I certainly see myself as much more sexy and I don't want to just put it in sex, because it's not just about sex, it's about comfortability in life. So I don't want to sort of lean that sort of, misnomer of like, it's transitioning is just about looking sexy and all that stuff. So that's not the only reason, but it's sort of couching it in those terms because that's how other people have talked about it. For me, while I do feel much more comfortable in my body and I'm very happy with how I look, both just in terms of being, an attractive looking person, but even more so just like a body that I feel comfortable living in, beyond sex and all that nonsense that people equate transness with, like always just being about sex. Like, I just feel comfortable in my body. And facial feminization surgery was just the last thing that still kind of does give me dysphoria. It's not the biggest one. It wasn't the biggest thing that gave me dysphoria, but it was something that I still think about from time to time and does cause me a little bit of distress here and there. Again, that has nothing to do with how I actually look. It's all up here. Anyways, moving on though, I am currently lucky enough to be living in a state in the United States, as well as own a healthcare plan that I pay way too much for, because I pay for my own healthcare insurance, because, my job is doing YouTube, so I have to pay my own healthcare, which I pay way too much for, because United States healthcare is wonderful. But regardless, I am lucky enough, even within the amount of money that I pay for all of that, that my insurance does cover facial feminization surgery when it is for alleviating gender dysphoria. At least it covers a large portion of it. Otherwise, I would not be able to afford facial feminization surgery, because it is also ridiculously expensive. But unfortunately, because I have Kaiser Permanente, which does luckily cover these things, they do only have a limited number of surgeons that you're allowed to go to under their healthcare plan. And for me, the only surgeon in the Seattle area that is covered by Kaiser that does these types of surgeries has a long waiting list for these surgeries. And because of that, I have actually been waiting over a year to get this surgery. I actually went in for my consultation about a year ago. I started this whole process of getting approved for the surgery by the insurance by going to see therapists and all that stuff that you have to do, which is way too much to get approval for this, over a year ago, and finally got scheduled for the surgery over a year ago, and had to wait months upon months to finally get to my date, which was going to be in a week. And if I'm being open and honest with all of you, because I've been waiting for this surgery, I've kind of felt that I put my life a little bit on hold. I've been progressing in my professional career and things like that, which I'm very excited for. As many of you know, my YouTube career is going really, really well. I have other opportunities with things like GameSpot and stuff like that, and I'm so excited for that. But in other areas, I've kind of been waiting. While I've been pursuing some romantic relationships here and there, and I've had romantic relationships in the past, there's an element of me that hasn't really been pursuing things like that in earnest, because I've been waiting to get this surgery. I know that, like, surface level beauty is not the only reason to sort of consider a relationship, but I have encountered a few people when I've gone on dates and said, like, hey, I'm planning to get this surgery, that stopped kind of being interested afterwards. Not that they were shallow necessarily, but I kind of get, to a degree, being like, your face is going to change. Like, when you're doing that first dating thing, looks are kind of part of it, and I do find it a little bit hurtful when people do that, but there's also an element to me that's like kind of understanding of that. I kind of understand it too. I don't feel fully ready to go out and date when I know that there are things about my body that I'm kind of hoping to change, and I'm scheduled to change. Again, this is being for me personally. I'll connect it to a larger trans experience in just a little bit. But that's like my personal feeling on it. Again, I know that there's a bit of wrapped up of my own internalized transphobia, other people's internalized transphobia too, even if they are trans supportive when they feel that way. Again, I'm not like saying, oh, they're transphobic people for feeling this way. It's more just like, again, this whole wrapped up stuff of expectations of how people look when we go dating and things like that. Regardless, I put my life on hold a little bit because I haven't really been pursuing these things in earnest because I've had this on the horizon. On top of that, too, I can't move at all. While I do love Seattle, I do plan on moving a little bit out of this apartment because prices are going up and things like that. But I can't move because if I move, then I will have to change insurances, and that will set me back to ground zero on having to go through the entire process again of getting these surgeries. I plan on staying in the area here, but again, it's a complicated wibbly wobbly thing, and I'm like, it's just easier to stay here. So in a lot of aspects, because of this surgery, my life has been on hold in some ways because of this. Some in my own head, some not. All that goes to say that I was feeling all that, and so to get the surgery in a week, I was very excited to finally just have this done off my plate, just have this thing completed so I can move forward in these aspects that I've kind of just been treading water in. And so, it's a bit devastating to find out today that my surgery has been canceled because of the increasing COVID cases in the area. Even more so, I learned that the surgery wasn't pushed back just a few weeks in hopes that the pandemic numbers would go down, but that my surgery is now rescheduled all the way in August. So however long that is, 8 months or so from now. Yeah. Kind of sucks. A lot. And I'm kind of devastated about it, to be kind of frank with you. Yeah. Like I said, I'm just so kind of frustrated because, again, it just means like I have to sit here waiting for all these things in my life to keep treading water. Probably gonna have to sign a lease with this apartment again, which, you know, it's a good apartment. I'm not gonna complain too much, but I did want to move, and now I have to sign another lease because I can't move. And also I am sort of waiting on dating, and in all that time too, still have the dysphoria that I was really excited to get done with. I know from actual experience, having gotten these other surgeries, how wonderful it feels to get these surgeries and after them to be like, yeah, I see myself a little bit more now. I see who I've always seen in my head a little bit more now. And I was really excited to have that feeling for this surgery too. And to be done, to have this be the last one that I'm done with, and I can just say I'm officially happy with where I am in my transition, and I'm done transitioning, I'm transitioned. I was really excited for that, and now I have to wait. And it's honestly kind of devastating. And I know some of you may be like, oh, it's only a few months, and I get that, and I will talk about how I am lucky in that, in many cases. But it also just sucks to know that you have to wait to see yourself a little bit better when you were so close to the finish line. And I won't go into the whole history of it too, but this is also added on frustration because this actually isn't the first time that I've had this surgery scheduled. As many of you know, I moved to Seattle just a little while ago, a little over a year ago, and I actually had planned to get this surgery in Los Angeles. But unfortunately, because I moved, I was set back to square one, and I had actually been waiting in Los Angeles for about a year too for the surgery. And you know, that was on me a little bit because I moved for work and things like that. So, you know, that was the choice that I had to make, you know, go move to where the work is, or, you know, stay and wait for this surgery that I was already waiting for. And I made the choice to pursue the career stuff, which sucks that I had to make that evaluation, but there you go. And so it's been over a year. Honestly, it's been a year for this specific one that I've been scheduled for and been pursuing, but I've been waiting for a while for this surgery. So it just feels like it's just going on, and it sucks. Now, as I said, I wanted to share this story not just to commiserate about my own frustrations on this. I shared it to just give you a sense of how I'm feeling about it in my own personal journey within this. But the reason that I wanted to share this was because this is not atypical in an experience for trans people. While my specific situation has its own unique foibles, this is not uncommon for many trans people. For other trans people like me who are lucky to have insurance that covers this healthcare, we will experience many of the same exact problems. There are long wait times for these surgeries because surgeons are inundated, and there aren't a lot of surgeons who do this work that are covered by insurances. There are many surgeons that do this work outside of insurances, but they are ridiculously expensive. I could go and do this surgery on my own if I wish to spend tens of thousands of dollars, but I don't have that money. And most trans people don't. And I am a trans person who is fairly lucky to be living a fairly stable financial life, YouTube algorithm aside. Many trans people don't have that luxury of having a financially stable life, even if they do have insurance. So people who are lucky enough to have insurance have to wait for these really long wait times for these surgeries. Secondly, too, as is kind of alluded to in just a second ago, many trans people don't have insurance that covers these surgeries at all. There are many places around the United States that don't cover these surgeries at all because people don't believe that it's worth caring about trans people's health care when it comes to these surgeries. Even further, as we talked about in other videos, there are states and places around this country and the United Kingdom where trans people's healthcare has been so vilified and demonized that it has been taken off the board completely for completely political reasons in a culture war fight that just harms trans people. And I talked a little bit more about that in this video that I'll link down below. And so there are many, many states that don't support these surgeries, even though they are necessary for many trans people's health. And I'm not just talking about FFS, I'm talking about vaginoplasty, breast augmentation, all those different things, or breast reduction for trans men. And they aren't covered at all, even though they can save lives in many cases, reducing the mental health strain on many trans people and reducing the risk for suicidal thoughts for many trans people. And it doesn't even extend to surgeries. There are many insurances that don't cover even more basic trans healthcare, like hormone replacement therapies, or even, God forbid, a freaking doctor who just understands the basics of a trans person's needs. Even those basics aren't covered by insurance. Like the fact that we don't just offer basic health care to everybody, that we've tied, especially in the United States, our health care to people's ability to work, especially considering the fact that trans people are often discriminated against when it comes to getting hired, which means that trans people are often less likely to have money to pay for insurance, number one, and number two, even if they would possibly get insurance through jobs or might even live in an area that would support transgender healthcare, might not be able to get it because they aren't able to get just a job, which we've tied to healthcare for some reason. And that, by the way, also eliminates trans people being able to get even more basic healthcare, like being just able to see a doctor if they're sick. But that's another whole aside that we can get into. But regardless, like, there are trans people that don't have healthcare, and that's even more devastating. So when I say I am lucky is the wrong word. Privileged is probably the better one. I'm privileged to be able to pay for my own health care. Privileged to be able to pay for my own health care. I am privileged to have insurance that covers basic health care. Again, privileged to have insurance. Like, I am privileged in a lot of aspects, but it feels weird to talk about things that should be what we do for people in societies that care for people, not just trans people, but other people as well. That should be just kind of basic to say I'm privileged in that, but there you go. All trans people deserve this basic functions, and even my frustrations are lucky for a trans person, I guess is the best way to put it. Even further on top of that, as I talked about with wait times, I spoke about it within insurances, but you can go to other countries as well and see very similar issues. I mean, in the United Kingdom, because trans healthcare has been so vilified, the national healthcare system in the UK barely has enough people working in trans healthcare at the gender clinics that are spread too thin throughout the country to be able to support any trans person's basic healthcare needs. The wait times are ridiculous for basic trans healthcare in the UK. I'm waiting several months for a surgery. There are trans people waiting years to just talk to a therapist about being trans in the UK, which is unacceptable, frankly. And even within all of these systems, even if they are lucky enough to have insurance that covers trans healthcare, even if they are lucky enough to be able to pay for trans healthcare, even if they are able to do all of that, they then have to sit through inordinate, bureaucracy that they constantly have to go through. Like, I myself, to get this surgery, had to see a therapist, had to go in to see a surgeon, had to see another therapist, had to talk to my insurance person and talk to them about getting like the paperwork in order, had to go through all of this. And I am lucky enough that I have the time to be able to do that. There are trans people that are working so hard that they don't have time to deal with all this bureaucracy, take time off to go and see these doctors, do all of these things to get these surgeries done. So there's just endless bureaucracy on top of the wait times that trans people have to deal with. On top of that, there's discrimination within the healthcare system that prevents trans people from getting these things. If you run into one of these people that you need to sign off on your surgery who, doesn't understand the need for it, or is more overtly transphobic, or doesn't understand how these systems work and get something wrong, making you have to deal with other bureaucracy stuff down the line, which I've had to deal with, by the way, too. Like, one doctor signed the wrong thing the wrong way, and I almost had a surgery the day of the surgery get canceled. Thankfully, I was able to deal with it, but other trans people aren't so lucky. So there's even discrimination and things within that, even when the system ostensibly works the way it should, which is never well enough. And it should also be mentioned that all of this, every single element of this, is compounded even more so for trans people of color. All of these issues that I stated are also reflected in many people of color fighting for their health care. And so for trans people who are also people of color, all of this is even more compounded and increased in many different cases. On top of that, I should also say, while I've been talking about this in a trans context, this affects many people across the board with surgeries getting canceled because of COVID. I've heard stories of people that have even more immediately medically dangerous surgeries postponed because of COVID, because of what's been going on. And that is scary and frustrating and just devastating on so many levels. And when I shared this story, I should say I saw many people getting upset at anti-vaxxers for the state of things, and I totally understand that to a degree. I understand why people would look at anti-vaxxers and feel anger and vitriol at people not getting vaccinated for the perpetuation of this pandemic long beyond when it should have been maybe not eliminated, but way less dangerous than it currently is. I get that. I understand that anger, and by no means judge people for it. But for me personally, my anger is not at anti-vaxxers. My anger is at the leaders who failed the anti-vaxxers. The leaders who took advantage of this situation to extend their own power, or failed to live up to the trust engendered in them to do basic research and instead spread misinformation about the pandemic. And I hold those things in equal measure. There are people who do know all the facts about this pandemic and will perpetuate lies because it allows them to stoke a culture war that gives them power and fuels their place in society in powerful positions. And on the other hand, there are people who are leaders who have fallen into those very pieces of misinformation that leaders above them have spewed, but they themselves have failed to do basic research that they should be doing as leaders of their community and continue to spread that misinformation. And even more worse information if you've seen some of the stuff out there. So my anger is not at anti-vaxxers. They have been fed this misinformation for one reason or another. And while I understand frustration at them, and by no means do I alleviate them of the harm that they have caused, certainly there are many entitled people and privileged people that we could get frustrated at within that group. The anger that I hold is for the leaders who have failed people. That's where the frustration is. I just wanted to kind of make that clear. I know that's a divergence, but I just wanted to at least state it because I'm feeling it too. So yeah, that's what I kind of wanted to say with this video. I didn't want this to be oh woe is Jessie. I am kind of devastated at the moment because of this situation. Not particularly pleased about it. But I am, again, lucky feels like the wrong word, but the surgery is going to happen eventually. I will have to wait, and we'll see what that means for my life in terms of things that I've been wanting to pursue for a while. But regardless, it will happen. I just have to wait a little bit longer, even though it's so close to the damn finish line. But I shared this story not for that reason, but to just tell you that this is what many trans people feel. And many trans people are in far more dire situations than I when it comes to this stuff. I will live. Frustratedly, but I will live and I will be fine in the end. And I will still be happy during this time. Frustrated in some aspects, but happy overall. I'm not going to sit here for the next few months just moping. I will have many happy days ahead, and I'm lucky to have them. There are trans people that don't get that. That don't get to have that. That haven't had the chances that I have had. And that guts me. Because it should gut you. I'm not telling you how to feel about trans healthcare. Maybe you agree or disagree on certain aspects of trans healthcare, but just know there are trans people that are suffering, that haven't even gotten the basic need of a therapist or a doctor who understands them. That my situation is just a distant reflection of. So, anyways, thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your care. I appreciate this community overall. Thank you for everything that you've done. Thank you for allowing me to pay for insurance, especially my patrons. I know this sounds trite, but like legitimately, you're paying my healthcare bills, all of you, quite directly. So thank you for that. And thank you for letting me do this. Have a chance to speak about this. To indulge the wrong word. To have a chance, to have a platform to share this. Again, something that many other trans people don't have. So thank you to all of you for all of that. And I love you. Mwah. And I bid you a wonderful good night, my friend. Truly live long and prosper.